My name is Mr. Zahn, and welcome to Year 6 Humanities and Social Sciences. This lesson is a part of our citizenship unit. The main focus will be the experience migrants had when coming to Australia in the 1900s. Our learning goal for today will be, I can understand the experience migrants had when they tried to enter Australia in the 1900s. Before we start the lesson, let's explore what Australia looks like now. We're a multicultural and diverse nation. More than 75% of Australians identify as having ancestry other than Australian. So many of your friends or classmates might be from overseas or have parents that were born overseas. Modern Australia is very diverse and recognises many different nations within our society. But was it always like this? Well, that's what we're going to focus on today. We know that women had limited rights in Australia, but what about migrants? Do you think they had more or less rights than women? First off, what is an immigrant? An immigrant is someone who leaves their country of origin and settles in a new one. In the 1900s, immigration was an important point for people who voted for federation. As a result, legislation was put in place that aimed at reducing the number of immigrants coming into Australia. These were the Pacific Islanders Labourers Act and the Immigration Act of 1901. These two legislations were enforced and were referred to as the White Australia Policy. What were the laws that made up the White Australia Policy? Well, the Pacific Islanders Labourers Act was a law that, when passed, allowed the deportation of Pacific Islanders throughout Queensland and northern New South Wales after 1906. Close to 10,000 Pacific Islanders were living in those parts of the country, and only around 700 remained after the mass deportation. Those Pacific Islander people that remained in the country faced severe discrimination, and finding work was extremely hard. Now, the Immigration Restriction Act was a similar but slightly different law that was put into place to control immigration into Australia. The legislation started in 1901, and its core goal was to restrict the number of non-European immigrants from entering Australia. People from these countries were referred to as undesirable. The combination of these two laws made up the White Australia Policy, and its core goal was to keep Australia white and keep people from other races out. So as you can guess, this caused a very racist culture to develop. So how did the government plan to keep people out of such a big country like Australia? Well, anyone that could be identified as Pacific Islander was not allowed into the country and was stopped by immigration officers at the border. Some were exempt from this law, but only if they were a part of a ship's crew involved with trading in Australia. For people travelling from non-European countries, or in those times referred to as undesirable countries, they would need to sit a test before being allowed to immigrate to Australia. The government decided that the best way to restrict who came into the country was for immigrants to sit a dictation test. This test was designed to stop people from non-European countries from entering Australia and provided grounds for deportation. This test was carried out by an immigration officer and asked immigrants to write down 50 words as dictated in any language. The language the test was carried out by was up to the officer performing the test. Not only that, the law stated that the test should be applied in a language with which the immigrant is not sufficiently acquainted with to be able to write out at dictation. This meant that immigrants from China or Africa could be asked to write 50 words in Italian or any other European language they were not familiar with. What do you think about the dictation test? Was it fair? So how did that impact people living in Australia? Well, as we said earlier, it led to the development of a very racist culture. Posters and advertisements were put up around the cities and towns asking citizens to vote and keep Australia white. This meant that anyone in Australia that was from Asian or the Pacific Islands faced a lot of discrimination. They also found getting a job extremely hard as no one wanted to hire them. When did these policies end, you might ask? Well, the dictation test ended in 1958, while other parts of the Immigration Restriction Act remained. The Racial Discrimination Act of 1975 made it illegal to discriminate against immigrants based on their race. This meant that people were free to immigrate to Australia. While this policy was in place for a long time, many people from countries all over the world settled in Australia and helped it become the multicultural and diverse country we live in now. As a takeaway activity for this lesson, I would ask you to read through the article from the website provided. After you've read the article, write down some of your thoughts. Some questions to help you think. How would you have felt in that situation? What would you have preferred to see instead? Write some of your responses down and reflect on how these people might have felt while being discriminated against.